Good morning, everyone. As my panelists come on stage, I am going to just introduce myself. My name is Katherine Romans. I'm the executive director of the Hill Country Alliance. We're a nonprofit organization that works all across Central Texas to advance the conversation around how we grow as a region while protecting the lands and waters and communities that make Central Texas so special. So, my job today is really to introduce the folks on the stage and stay out of the way, because I have pulled together an incredible lineup of experts who have been working to advance land conservation, to think about and research and study the trends of land fragmentation in our state for cumulatively decades on this stage. So I'm going to just briefly introduce who I've got up here and then hand it over to them. So starting from the far end, we have Roel Lopez. He's the executive director of the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute. To Roel's left, I have Chad Ellis. Chad is the CEO of the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. Thank you, Chad, for being here. To Chad's left, I have James Oliver. James has many hats, but I'm going to introduce him as a West Texas landowner. He's the manager and co-owner of Cameron and Oliver Ranch Company, in addition to many other roles that I hope you talk about, James. To James's left, I have Mark Steinbach. Mark is the executive director of the Texas Land Conservancy. And joining me to my right is Marianne Piacentini. Marianne is the CEO and president of the Coastal Prairie Conservancy. Got that right? All right, so our panel discussion today is talking about land fragmentation in the state of Texas. And I wanted to turn things over right away to Dr. Roel Lopez to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say land fragmentation, what the trends are in the state, what's driving those trends, and maybe talk a little bit about how that impacts other natural resources.
Sure, thank you. Does this work? Yep.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we've got a slide that we can pull up to kick things off.
All right, well, thank you. I think David did a wonderful job in sort of setting the stage in terms of the importance of land conservation in our state and some of the changes that we're seeing here in the next couple of years. So I was asked to maybe start out with defining land fragmentation. To the far right is a visual that kind of shows what maybe the typical 1,000-acre ranch farm in Texas might look like. And due to various drivers, that 1,000 acres might be broken up or fragmented into smaller parcels, if you will. And then through time, some of those parcels may move out of traditional ag use of some sort, whether it's for grazing or farming row crops, etc. And so that in essence is the issue at hand. And again, David sort of alluded to some of the changes with regards to the increases in the number of people in our state and what the implications of that might look like. So one thing that we collectively will share with you today is by the end of today, we're going to lose about 1,000 acres of working lands, farms, ranches, family forests. And so then the question for us as a group in thinking about things moving forward is, what are the consequences of those losses, but more importantly, what are our actions in trying to sort of address those changes moving ahead? The top graph there with the arrow kind of shows you a process that we've seen in other states throughout the United States, where a strong economy results in an increasing in population, which is an increase in demand for farms and ranches, these working lands, and associated higher market values, and ultimately the fragmentation and conversion of that farm and ranch. So that's kind of the process that we're describing and we're really talking about. And the thing that's striking to us is 20 plus years ago, we were losing about 60 acres a day. 5 years ago, that increased to about 526 acres a day. And today, as I mentioned, with the increasing of 11 to 1,200 people to the state roster, we're losing a little over 1,000 acres a day. And so some of the conversation with my colleagues up here this morning is going to be to discuss what are the consequences of that, and more importantly, what are some of the things that we can do to try to address that. The last point I'd leave with you as we think about this, when we think of rural communities, about 80% of the state is still some sort of rural land, rural community. And though many of us live in these urban centers, 85% of Texans live in these urban centers, the benefits of that 81+% of these farms and ranches benefit us whether we're in Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, etc. And so really what we're talking about is the sustainability of us collectively. I hate to use the term rural versus urban Texans. It's Texans. We're Texans that all benefit from these private lands. And so how can we address that moving forward? So with that, I'm going to yield my time to the next person.
Awesome. That bar chart on the bottom of the slide is so striking to show the dramatic increase in the number of acres that are lost to fragmentation and development over time. These numbers are very helpful, but I want to ask our panelists to maybe by way of introduction, talk a little bit about what that land fragmentation looks like for each of you. From the coastal prairies to far west Texas, there are different kind of costs and pressures associated with land fragmentation. So Chad, I wonder if I could start with you to talk a little bit about your work and land fragmentation as it relates to farms and ranches.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Katherine. And I sit there and listen to Roel, right? And we think about the issue. 15 years ago, what we were losing in one day, we're losing in 1 hour today, right? And it's just shocking. And I remember working with Roel 15 years ago, and at that time I looked like Fabio and had hair, Yeah.
That's a visual.
And,
Thank you for that.
And we didn't. We knew this issue, but we didn't realize the increase and like how fast it was coming. And now we're sort of behind the 8 ball. But it comes up with David said, we're going to fight this through collaboration. And our work at Texas Ag Land Trust is really about how do we wake up each and every day of figuring out how do we help empower the land steward, the James Olivers across this state, and how do we empower them to be better tomorrow than they are today? And not only be able to provide for their families, but also provide for all Texans and all the ecosystem services. And I'm sure we'll get more into that, but that's our concern. And we're seeing this concern, what we think about the triangle, right, of Dallas to, through Austin to San Antonio to Houston, right, as we have this huge fragmentation there. But we're seeing the pressures, and I'm sure James will kind of talk a little bit of, his experience in far west Texas. We're seeing it everywhere. And the demand of water. And so it's just us. How do we come together? How do we think of the innovation is key, right? Is we have to have more tools in the toolbox, and we have to be able to, bring forward solutions at a quicker rate than we've ever imagined. So.
All right, James, do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on in West Texas?
Good morning, everyone. So Roel did some work several years ago that was actually predicted that we were going to see the largest intergenerational transfer of wealth that this country's ever seen. Primarily those assets are real estate based, and we are in the middle of it now as we speak, especially in rural West Texas. I had a neighbor, 13,000 acres, had moved away. His children were not raised there. So they just sold the whole ranch. Well, that will be ranchettes in 6 months, and it'll maybe they'll stay 1,000-acre parcels, probably smaller than that. And we're seeing it all across West Texas. It's by no one's fault. It's just people didn't grow up on the land. Those economies are tough to make a living in some cases, and that's what there's estate tax issues. They just face different issues, but we're seeing it all over out there.
All right, Mark, the Texas Land Conservancy works all across the state, and I know you guys have prioritized water resources and rivers in particular with your strategy. Do you want to talk about what you're seeing on the ground in terms of land fragmentation?
Yeah, so I think the biggest issue that we are facing was a water shortage combined with a land development. We have prioritized river systems around the state with the idea that if you can protect the land where the rain falls, you're protecting the water resources. It's an uphill battle. We're all going to keep saying the same thing over and over. There's no doubt about that, and we are the tip of a very short spear, unfortunately. We do need to find new tools in our toolbox, but right now, what you see on the stage is the biggest tool that we have for working on this stuff, and we're continuing to try to be more creative, but that's the challenge.
Okay, I'm going to bring us back to the tool in just a minute. But Marianne, I want to hear from you. You're focused on the Houston, coastal Prairie area. What does land fragmentation look like in that part of the state? And what do you think some of the drivers might be?
So I work in both the metropolitan Houston area, but also along the coast for 9 counties. And essentially, in the metropolitan area, the driver is growth. Harris County is the the fastest growing county in the nation. We're only number 4 in terms of size, but we're growing astronomically. We also have incredible economic drivers. I mean, we have a very healthy community and economy because of technology, because of the medical center, because of oil and gas, all those kinds of things. And so lots of people are moving there. Lots of people are wanting to settle there. Another big driver, though, for the fragmentation is actually the pandemic. The pandemic made people understand that they didn't have to drive into Houston every day to get to work, and they could work at home, and that meant they wanted a bigger house, and it meant they wanted a more affordable house. And so suburban, western Harris County, eastern Waller County are growing in ways that I never imagined they would grow. And they're these subdivisions that not only have residential properties, they also have their own hubs, their own commercial centers. So they're very much like the Woodlands, if you're familiar with that, where they have a business center. They have people who don't have to drive 40, 50 miles. And trust me, if you have to drive I-10 to get into, Houston, you're on the road for an hour and a half every day. If you come from the Woodlands, it's sometimes 2 hours. Another thing that is driving it are also roads. They are road crazy in the metropolitan area, seriously. When the Grand Parkway came along for Segment E, which was on the Prairie, and we didn't fight it, but the Sierra Club fought it. We were neutral. We were trying to show that it was going to open up 50,000 acres of pristine prairie, and it did. And the development follows roads. Roads don't follow development. And you can say, if you're an urban planner, which I am, that that's the way it has to be, because once the houses are there, you'd have a bad road situation. On the other hand, it made people really understand that they could get where they wanted to go. And I had one gentleman tell me, when we were talking about quality of life, and I was talking about how great it is to have natural spaces, he said, "Oh, quality life, Marianne, is getting to where you want to go as fast as you can get there." And I looked at him and I went, "Seriously?" And he said, "Yes." And so that is driving it. And so, we're finding that it's harder and harder to protect things just outside of Houston. And we're 30 miles from Houston, and you wouldn't know it because the development is so crazy to the east of us, 3 miles east, but also now to the north of us. And we're finding that it is impacting water, the hydrology, because we don't have rules and regulations that are perhaps as robust as they should be. So we're finding that a project that we were going to work on, which was a stream mitigation project that was going to earn us, probably $10 million as part of a joint venture, now can't go forward because of the way that the development is occurring to the north and west of us. And I can talk, and we'll talk later, about how the development along the coast is really being driven both by renewables and by, solar farms, about people who are giving up oil and gas because there is I don't want to say it, but not burnt out, but there's no more oil and gas in some of those areas. And so now they're going toward renewables, which is great, but it also means that farms and ranches that were in agriculture are now in solar panels. And there's some agriculture, but there's certainly not coastal prairie, because so far you can't grow coastal prairie underneath solar panels, even when raised.
Roel, were you going to jump in on that? No. I love thinking about quality of life as driven by how fast I can get from my house to wherever I want to go. That's a narrow focus. James, do you mind if I bring it back to you? You touched a little bit on the perspective of being a landowner and kind of the pressures that landowners face. Do you mind expanding on that a little bit? Just the realities of what it means to own and steward a family ranch, and how you think about passing that legacy on to the next generation and the pressures that are associated with fragmentation.
Well, just like much of America, we have experienced inflationary costs in everything we do. Labor when we can find it, fuel, especially in our part of Texas. I think we've had 3 better than average rain years in the last 16 years. And so we've been fighting drought pressure. Where we are in the western Edwards Plateau, it was historically sheep and goats. As our neighbors have left that business or sold those ranches and something other than that kind of production agriculture comes in, then we fight predator problems. And so it feels like an uphill battle sometimes, but then every once in a while we'll have a reprieve like we do right now. We've got great markets, a little bit of rain, and it makes it all worthwhile. But in those rural communities, it is often difficult to raise a family and educate children. My oldest son absolutely loves the ranches. Fortunately for many of us up here, he got interested early in primarily agricultural and natural resource policy, so he's in Austin. His future will be driving out and working when he has the opportunity. My youngest son loves the ranches, but is not willing to live in Ozona. So it's challenging. There's, outside of the cost of operating them, the cost of passing them to the next generation, the cost of planning, both financial and mental cost of doing those things. So it makes it very, very difficult for families.
Yeah, jump in.
KPC. We used to be the Prairie Conservancy, and you can tell I can still not get over it. But we're also a landowner. We own 14,000 acres of land that we have to manage, that we have to provide all of the activities that are going on. And while we do lease some of it to farmers and ranchers, we have to take care of it. And it is, as James said, very expensive to do that. And until the last 3 years, we actually weren't taking very good care of our land because we didn't have the money. I have a conservation director who would say, Mary Ann, if you can give me $250,000 every year, I can do this. And we couldn't raise it because people love to help us buy land, but they didn't like to help us operate it or maintain it. But in the last 3 years, we've been very fortunate, and I'm afraid this may be going away, but we've been very fortunate to do a lot of cost share programs with Natural Resources Conservation Service. And we've been able to do prescribed burns, we've been able to do invasive species control, whether mechanical or chemical, and it's started to bring back the native grasses that were there, that are outcompeted often by these more introduced species. We also work a lot with farmers who really want to rice farm again, but they need water, and we're on, we cannot use our groundwater anymore in Harris County. We can still use it in Waller County, but not in Harris. It's all surface water, but you can dig a well, but it's very expensive. So rice needs water, and if the water doesn't come down from the sky, you have to pump it, and that also costs to pump it with diesel or fuel. If you've got a solar well, it's great, but it is very expensive. And cattle prices right now, we actually have a working cattle ranch that we operate. I'm not sure why sometimes, because we are not cattle experts at all, and we're rethinking that very much so right now. But we sell our herd when it's expensive. Sell our calves when we can raise a lot of money. But then if we don't raise them ourselves, we have to buy them, and it's just as expensive to buy them back. So we keep thinking, well, if we had more cattle, we'd make more money. We're not sure that's true, but we're gonna sort of test that theory. But the other issue is that a lot of, and this is happening on the Katy Prairie too, we have some people who've owned their land, maybe not as long as you've owned your land, but you know, in the of your family, I would say, not you
Yes, my
personally.
children will be the 6th generation.
Yes. And so we've got people who are only maybe 2nd or 3rd generation, but their kids can't make a living on that land. And so they are going into towns, they're going to other states to make money, and they're not coming back. And so then the farmer is left with, okay, what am I going to do? I'm, 80 years old. Am I going to continue to rice farm? Rice farming is pretty intense. And so they aren't doing it. And so then they're trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? In the first round of our protecting land, a lot of people donated a conservation easement or sold us their land very cheaply. That ship is passed. It's not there anymore. So now we're having to find money to do it. And we just received, and I know Chad can talk about this too, $25 million from the Natural Resources Conservation Service to buy conservation easements and to buy land. And it's on hold because the money that we got is from the Inflationary Reduction Act. And I'm not going to be political, but I'm just going to say we don't know if that $25 million is going to come to us.
Marianne, I had no idea you were a cattle rancher, so thank you for
My
sharing that.
mom, when she was still alive, said, I always knew that she was going to be a cowgirl.
Chad, you
not
wanna
true.
jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at this chart that Roel's put together, right? And I think one of our other challenges we have is really kind of around the economic growth, the population growth, right? We're having more, in urban centers that are further and further disconnected to agriculture, right? And we don't understand really what it takes and where our water comes from, right? Lyndon B. Johnson said it the best, right? Is soil and water conservation starts where the first raindrop falls, right? And in Texas, that's on a rancher, that's on a farmer, that's on a private forester, et cetera. But I think we also have to understand too is perspectives matter, as Marianne mentioned, of the speed and the quickness to me to get to the store and back. And I think of perspectives. I think of Frank Sinatra. He said it the best, right? Is I feel sorry for the folks that wake up in the morning that don't drink, because that's when they wake up in the morning, that's as good as they're going to feel, right? And so I think we have to kind of understand this. And this is a
great advice.
Yes, yeah. Just saying.
I hope everyone wrote that down.
So I mean, it's just, these are our challenges, and I think it becomes of how do we, but this also scares me too, right? And I don't think we fully understand, like I mentioned earlier, like 15 years ago, we were seeing this, increase of fragmentation, but we didn't really realize how quick it was coming. And I think we're at another one where it's going to be a steeper curve for us. When we look at our average age of our landowners are pushing 70 years of age, they're trying, as Marianne mentioned, they're trying to make the decision, what does this look like? And we see, this again, the chart of, the value, the incentives, and that's an option.
Yeah, that's great. And I feel like it's been so helpful to put our minds in the perspective of the landowner and just understand those driving forces and the pressures that landowners are feeling. I wonder if we could pivot real briefly to tying it to the urban residents of the state. Because Roel, you started us off by saying 85% of the state of Texas lives in our big metropolitan areas. So how do we make land fragmentation feel relevant to someone in Dallas or Fort Worth or Houston or San Antonio?
That's a great question, and I think we've spent the first couple of minutes here talking about the issue and the problems, the challenges. So now the question is, what's the answer moving forward, right? And in my mind, it's twofold. The first is the recognition that there's value to a farm and ranch. And some of the terms that Chad, others have used is ecosystem services, the value of water, things of that sort. So part of the challenge, I think, is we're losing 1,000 acres a day, but what's the consequence of that? And so some of the information that we pulled together here is an example of that. I call it storytelling. It's being able to convey to that 85% of Texans what the value of that farm and ranch is upriver, upstream, and so forth. That's the first piece. The second is, how can we fully recognize the values of those ecosystem services, and looking at incentive market-based strategies beyond conservation easements? To me, are a real critical aspect to land conservation. They serve as an anchor, but then what are some of the other things that we could do to, again, leverage and really bring forth the full value of land? The last 2 points, and it goes back to this process of fragmentation. There's a reason why they take 1,000 acres and break it into a smaller tract. From a return on investment, you can get more from a small acreage land sale than you can from a large acre land sale. And so we have data over the last 50 years that shows this disparity. And so the process of fragmentation is a business, an economic decision. That's the first point. The second is the conversion is just due to the reality. I'm looking at James, and when they're selling land in, let's say, Travis County by the square foot, it's kind of hard to sit up here and say, oh, well, we're going to try to encourage grazing and all these things. The good news is there are a lot of landowners. There's 250,000 landowners, and when asked via survey information, what's the reason for owning land? Fortunately, they have other reasons like recreation, family value, tradition, et cetera, et cetera. And I mention that because we can sort of offset the economic aspect of it, but we have to try to come halfway or a little closer to not doing anything. And to me, that's the part of the solution.
Okay, so we're turning to solutions, and Mark, I want to turn to you. We've mentioned conservation easements a number of times. I think this is a pretty savvy audience of folks, many of whom work in land conservation and know conservation easements. But do you mind talking a little bit about that tool? And everyone on this stage is affiliated in some way or another with a land trust. What are land trust organizations? What is this tool to kind of push back on the pressures of fragmentation?
Yeah, so conservation easement is the term that we all use, sometimes a little bit of a misnomer. We also use conservation agreement, but they are agreements that we work with landowners through either a voluntary or a paid practice to conserve that property, and it still remains in the landowner's hands. And then the organizations that typically work with those with those landowners are land trusts, like all of us are representing on the stage of different groups. Sometimes cities have their own conservation division. Travis County, City of San Antonio, different county municipalities will do that. Sometimes universities do it, but most commonly it's nonprofit organizations like us. And those agreements are what I was referring to earlier, what we really use to try to encourage more land to be conserved. Because we're not going to be able to buy our way out of this problem. There is not enough money in the state. Texas Parks and Wildlife cannot steward, 20 or 30 million acres of land just by buying it all up. And so the most economical way to do this is to find landowners, either incentivize them to do it through either tax purposes or through payments up front, and then the responsibility stays with them for managing the land. They still get to use it, they farm it, they ranch it, and it is a much more economical way to encourage this kind of stuff. So speaking about, James was talking about his family, my family's in a similar situation. I am now a 5th generation landowner from our property, which was originally 640 acres back in the 1800s and is now 100 acres. Not very much land, but still expensive. My dad's always like, hey, we got to buy something new. There's a new tractor, and something's always happening. Yeah, there's always something. And so land is expensive. And so you can't, if you tried to own it all, there would be no way to do it. And so the only real opportunity is working collaboratively with landowners to try to find ways to do this across the state.
Can I go back to the comment about urbanites and why they should care about what we do? Most of the Conservancy's supporters have never even been on the Katy Prairie, even though we have public access. They don't care. They want to support us because of the services we provide, one of which is flood mitigation. When tax day flood came, which is, one of the 500-year floods before Hurricane Harvey, of which we had 3 in 2 years. The Conservancy lands were under 5 feet of water, 20,000 acres of land, because we protect more than we own, and that 100,000 acre feet of water didn't go downstream into somebody's house, which was amazing. And part of it was because we got 23 inches of rain in 12 hours. So the water had nowhere to go. But with Harvey, it was a little different because it was over days, and unfortunately a lot of people were flooded. But people see the Katy Prairie as something that can hold water. So one of the things we've done are a lot of studies with the Speed Center at Rice University to talk about what's the value of that. And we're now talking with Resource Environmental Solutions about, can we sell water credits, water retention credits, and not just for us, as a land trust, which we always are looking for ways to be more entrepreneurial and make money, but for our landowners. If this is another tool they have, another opportunity to make money on their land without having to give it up, they're going to do it. The other thing is, I don't think we do a very good job, and I know that the American Farmland Trust did a great job before, but I don't know that they've done a lot of this lately, but the cost of community services. When you look at the infrastructure needs of farms and ranches, and the fact that maybe there are only 5 people on a 1,000-acre ranch that have kids that need to go to school, that they don't need roads, it only costs, at least the studies that I've seen, about every dollar that they put in taxes, they have to take back 25% for 25 cents, for infrastructure. But in a development, you put $1 in, you're getting $1.25 to $1.40 in services. I know they get more taxes, I get that, but they're also paying a lot more. And I don't think our elected officials and our appointed officials understand that. We also have to look at, wildlife habitat, and I am first one to tell you that I can only recognize 10 birds if they look like what they're in the book. So I'm not an expert, but fortunately I have staff who know how to do this. But, wildlife habitat, as we lose more diversity, we're losing part of ourselves as well. And, we have about 3,500 acres that's contiguous that we call our Indian Grass Preserve. And it had, a few years ago, it was named a globally important bird area by National Audubon, because we support so many grassland birds that are in decline. And if you read a lot about birds, you know that 3 billion birds were lost from the 70s to today. And we can't continue to keep doing that, whether it's the types of species or it's just the numbers that we're losing. And so these are things that people have to understand, even if they never go on the land. But of course, it's also important, let's get them on the land. There's an adage for Native Americans that said that if you can't get on the land, you can't love the land. If you can't love the land, you don't want to save the land and protect the land. And that's probably a really bad bastardization of what they really said, but it's kind of what they meant. And so I think that we have to work harder. There's a group called the Western Reserves Lands Conservancy that is a fantastic land trust, and they recognized that working outside of Cleveland wasn't getting them the kind of support, the kind of awareness that they wanted, and they started working in Cleveland on these tracts that had been abandoned, turning them into parks, turning them into community gardens, and all of a sudden now they are the place that people go to find out what should we do about water, what should we do about habitat, what should we do about land protection. And I think all of us are trying to do more and more of that without becoming necessarily an urban land trust, but saying that there is a role for us.
That's super helpful. And Chad, I wonder if I could turn it to you to talk a little bit more about the layered benefits that come from protected lands and how you are thinking about having those conversations with landowners around easements.
Yeah, I think, we've kind of hit some of this is, when we think about our land stewards, right? Land stewardship requires land stewards, and it's how do we keep them on the land? And really when we think about it, it's a business too, right? And Mary Ann's filling that and kind of learning a business on the own, of the dynamics. And I always kind of say conservation without compensation is only a conversation, right? And really take that home. And so we have this aspect. And so what we kind of call and look at Texas Ag Land Trust is what we call additive conservation. So how are these tools and these other aspects of ecosystem services and the markets and things that we can keep stacking this ability and financial streams back to our land stewards across this state, beyond, just the conservation easement. And I always kind of say, right, if we can keep adding these tools, the conservation easement's really the toolbox that's holding all these tools and these investments long-term and perpetually. And so we have to, kind of comes back to this conversation of ecosystem services. We have to be able, James is out there blood, sweat, and tears every day, stewarding his land, and you're not receiving, we haven't paid, right, historically as a community as a whole for these things. We've taken for granted that our water, carbon sequestration, all of these ecosystem services. And I think that's the thing, and I'd love to kind of hear Roel's conversation on this too, of his work, is land as an infrastructure and the value of these ecosystem services and trying to kind of add these abilities. If we don't, right, we're not gonna be successful. So that's where we're really trying to be the innovation. It's going to be innovations, but it's going to take the partnerships and collaborations for us to kind of unlock these markets.
Chad,
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Chad, a question? Chad, can you talk a little bit more about how successful you've been with actually layering carbon credits on their
Sure.
properties? Because I think that there are a lot of people who'd be interested in that.
Yeah, so when we think about carbon markets, have been around for a long time. I think it's a lot of times we're thinking about it, it's new, but it's been around for a long time. I've been in the space for 10 years, which isn't very long, but it's a long time in this space of trying to build these markets. And so what we were able to do is, there's different types of carbon markets. One of the kind of older traditional type of carbon market is called the avoided conversion of grassland market. So in that particular market, you must, to meet the protocol and how that market is developed, must have a conservation easement. So 30 years ago, when people got interested in a carbon market, they would come and talk about it, and then they were told, hey, you have to do a conservation easement. And, they just weren't ready. They hadn't thought about it in that aspect. And I think, Mark and Marianne, we can all, and others in this audience can talk about the demand of conservation easements is we've never seen it before, where it's actually a tool. One of our biggest issues that we've talked about is money and being able, we don't have a lot of pots of money in the state, unfortunately, as other states, to help pay for conservation easements. So we're utilizing the carbon market as a tool, and where we can, pay for carbon that they have stored historically in there, and be able to kind of pay for conservation easements over time. And if we're able to find other funding for that, it's again, is that stack of additional dollars. There's a carbon sequestration side of the carbon market where we're able to add that and layer that. We're trying to look at water markets. We're looking at habitat leases that we're trying to pilot and put those together. And again, it's this collaboration, even outside this room, of corporations, and we're having those conversations from the corporations to our land stewards on the ground, and trying to be the bridge where we can find equal opportunities for both.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about open spaces and all the ecosystem services as part of the natural infrastructure that supports anyone who lives in a city or who thinks about their water future, their flood mitigation benefits. Roel, do you mind talking a little bit more about some of the research that you've been a part of and looking at specific numbers associated with ecosystem services coming from open spaces?
Sure. So in the last couple of years, namely due to Chad always asking me, when are we going to have a Texas ecosystem services report? California did one several years ago, and it served as kind of a model for us to look at. And one of the things I like telling people about that type of work, and there's other examples of that, whether it's the economics of white-tailed deer to the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Conservation Program to the broader ecosystem services, it's really goes to this idea of what's the value of losing, or the consequences of losing a farm and ranch, and the values associated with that. And so that type of effort helps in telling that story. It's a lot easier for us to sit up here and talk about, all right, we're losing this, and as a result, at the end of the day, we're going to lose 1,000 acres. We're not going to be able to refill 142 water towers, the average water tower in Texas. That's when it starts to kind of hit home. The other thing that we oftentimes don't talk about in terms of value is how many folks in this room have a phone, an iPhone of some sort. Raise your phone up, everybody, right? All right. So the camera on my phone went out probably like a week ago or so, and that's a pretty hard thing not to have on a phone, right, as a camera. And so I was fighting it. I thought, I'm not going to get a new iPhone, and I was forced to get a new iPhone. And I thought to myself, how much do we spend on our phones? $1,000, $800, and we really don't even think much about it. There's water on everyone's table in the back there. How much do we pay for water? Very low amount. So that's the thing that's striking to me is we talk about the value of natural resources, whether it be water or recreation opportunities, et cetera. It's relatively low cost. And then trying to offset the alternative, which is fragmenting a property, then converting it. And so that's part of our challenge. And honestly, I don't want to leave on a negative note, but I think that's something that we're going to have to continue to sort of address and deal with. So that kind of work isn't perfect. And I'm looking at David being an economist and so forth. To me, it's okay if it's not perfect. It starts the story. It gives us an entry point to say, did you think that, did you realize that this is a value of X type of thing? Because we really have never done that. And that's that's the shift that we're seeing now.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, Roel. I think about it when we talk about the 1,023 acres that we're losing a day, right? And we all kind of sit there and like, wow. But there's a lot of us that don't really, like, how big is that? What is that? We can't wrap our hands around what 1,023. And we have the mindset, Texas is big. We can afford to lose a little bit. And I think that's sort of been the mentality. But Roel, and check me on my math, but I'm kind of running numbers in my head while you were talking. That 1,023 acres, and say that was just right here in the triangle part, and that's where we lost it today. Do we have any idea how many water bottles that would be? Like that conservation and that stewardship of that water and the stewardship of that 1,023 acres would provide. And
should we take some guesses, and the winner will get a new iPhone?
Or a used iPhone. You have a used iPhone.
I could give you the trade in. The camera's not working real well.
And I think this is where the economics and the stuff not being, but we have to be able to tie it down where we can all grab to it. It's going to be roughly 5 billion water bottles that we lost today. Right? I mean, that starts putting it in perspective, and that's how we have to start talking about it. And it's like at TALT is, I said it from day one when I went to TALT 5 years ago, we got to stop talking about the acres, but we got to talk about the impact of the acres, right? And that's where we've missed the boat, and especially as we're getting further and further disconnected to land and what land provides, in ecosystem services, which are the goods and benefits. And we've talked, how, many things. And there's a lot of ecosystem services that we can't put a dollar figure on. And I think of mental health, right? What is the value of open space to all of us in mental health? And COVID was a great example. It was also the double-edged sword, as Mary Ann mentioned, right? But think if we didn't have the open space during COVID and, where we would be as a community. So, sorry, I kind of get passionate.
No, that's great. The passion is infectious. I want to keep on the incentives, the what can we all do as folks in this room, what do you see as incentives and tools to make conservation more likely? I know we at the Hill Country Alliance are working a lot with cities and counties on creating tools and mechanisms. Mark, I maybe want to kick it to you to think about more that we can all be doing to incentivize conservation.
So I think a great example, and Roel as a San Antonio, and Chad as San Antonio people can talk to, but City of San Antonio, it's been what, a decade since, had an unused 1/8 of a cent sales tax in their city sales tax. And they went to the community and said, hey, we can use this to buy conservation easements over our aquifer recharge to get you clean water and more water, and overwhelmingly passed 2 different times. They have protected thousands of acres across the Edwards Aquifer recharge zone using a very small amount of money that impacted people very little, but had a gigantic payback for them. And that was a very creative way they did it, and that's just one solution to look at. Kindle, yeah. So, I mean, people are thinking more about this kind of stuff, and water is always going to be a driver. And because it was so valuable from a clean and quantity standpoint, it was relatable. And that's what Chad was getting to. It's something that you can think about and be like, oh, clean water out of my tap makes sense. 1,000 acres is an abstract idea. I also want to go back to a startling fact that is sad. The #1 irrigated crop in America, lawn grass. We take potable water and put it on something that has no economic return and then charge pennies for it. It's crazy. Our kids are going to be like, y'all did what? Seriously, it's absolutely bonkers. But to your point, we're not prioritizing it right from an economic standpoint. If you want to spend 100,000 gallons of water on your lawn grass, you're going to pay for it, but we don't do that. So those are the kind of things that you can think about.
And they don't require conservation in many areas during droughts. But I will say that one thing that we have to do is, people, real honest-to-God citizens need to want to have this, because they need to make sure that their elected officials know that these things are going to go forward. I mean, most of the bonds that have been introduced in the counties have passed overwhelmingly. People really want it and they care about it. But if an elected official doesn't hear from their constituents that they want to put this on the ballot, that it's going to win, they don't do it. In Houston, we have tried to have ballot initiatives for conservation over and over again, and we just haven't been able to do it. Now, they've had park bonds, they've had street bonds, they've had flood bonds, they've had all kinds of bonds, but they don't understand that having a bond to save natural spaces would really benefit them. So one of the things that we're trying to do, and it's beginning to take effect, is to show people what the value is of these natural infrastructure preservation projects or nature-based solutions are. Our Harris County Flood Control District is finding out, just as David said, that it's a lot more efficient to do something with a nature-based solution than it is to do it with engineered solution. Plus, you don't really need to take care of it because it takes care of itself. So perfect example is New York has, and you'll be amazed at this, New York has some of the best drinking water in the United States today. And they were thinking about doing a big treatment plant that was going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And they just kind of balked at it because they were in economic troubles and they didn't think that they could do it. And so they decided, instead, let's look at what are our options. And they did conservation easements with farmers upstream in, I think it was Dutchess County and one other, King County, I can't remember what the two are, but they did. For pennies on the dollar, it cost them maybe about $10 million to do this. And their drinking water remained pure, remained, good, and they didn't have to have this treatment plant. Sebago Lake in Maine, where I'm originally from, does the same thing. It has incredible drinking water, and they are now working with all the landowners around Sebago Lake to put conservation easements on it that will focus on water. And I think that we need to do a better job of deciding what's important to people, and if it's drinking water and it's not critters, then that's what we need to do. I mean, we may care about the birds, the bees, the bunnies, coyotes, whatever, but maybe, thank you, maybe nobody else does. So let's find out what's important to them, and let's make sure that we have an economic argument, but we also have an argument that maybe does what I think Mark just said, is not have our kids think we were idiots, that we actually knew. Yeah. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. But
luck with that one.
to think that we left a legacy.
Yeah, James, I want to turn to you and also hear if there's any statewide conversations going
So
on.
I have spent my entire life in agriculture, either as I am now as a producer, as an agricultural banker. I was with Talt for 7.5 years on staff. I'm involved with Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers. My point about all that is most landowners care deeply and want to do the right thing. They don't want to put up solar panels. They don't want to put up wind generation units. But when I started replacing fence, in some cases 95-year-old fence, it was $250 a foot. The fence we just completed is $5 a foot, and we don't build feet, we build miles. We're having to replace windmills. I love windmills to pump water because we don't have the labor to climb up on those towers and pull windmills. Our insurance is already high enough with no claims. If somebody fell off a windmill tower, it's over. If you don't lose a ranch over it. You know, a solar pump with the panels in our part of the world, we're 320 feet deep on average, is 8,500. And we're trying to leave these to the next generation in production agriculture and open space and wildlife production, which is incredibly important to our revenue sources. But it costs us a lot of money. You know, my goal is to give my children the option to decide what to do with those and to steward them properly. And so these guys have all worked for years and years and years to determine or to help incentivize landowners. It's not necessarily incentivizing, it's giving them the resources that they don't have. Most everybody in the landowning community is asset rich and cash poor. They don't have the cash to do those things. And then when it doesn't rain 10 years, and we've got some very dear friends in West Texas that haven't had cattle on their ranches in 5 years now, and they don't have mineral income. And so we've got to educate. We've got to get some statewide resources coupled with federal resources to get conservation in whatever form or fashion that looks like, but to get conservation on the ground. Some of the best conservation I could do is just my resource management, my forage management. But I got to have fences. I got to have labor. I got to have pickups. And so, anyway, I just wanted to be, they've done a really good job of talking about all the things they're doing to help, not necessarily incentivize landowners, but to get them some resources. And from the other side of the fence, we've got to have them. We've just got to have them to continue doing this, or it comes to the decision, well, if I can't build a fence, I'll put up a windmill. If I can't build a fence, or I can't buy a pickup, or I can't, drill a well, I'm going to put solar panels on it, and we'll hold the land. But then we've got the next generation we've generated something.
Yeah, Roel, you want to?
Just to kind of add to that, James, I think there definitely has to be an economic aspect to land conservation. I think that hopefully people are hearing that pretty loud and clear. We've talked about things like carbon and water markets and things of that sort. The other thing that I kind of remind myself of, and I'm going to ask James the question, is how long have we been selling goats or cows?
Centuries.
Long time, about 10,000 years. And so part of the solution is innovation, right? But what we're working at a fairly quick rate, but the changes in land fragmentation and conversion are even faster, is trying to develop those innovative markets. And my reason for asking that question is, people say, well, why haven't you figured out the carbon market? Or why haven't you figured out biodiversity? To me, is going to be a market that'll be even bigger. I know I was talking to Dr. Frisbee earlier about pollinator habitat and the value of that. And so I think we're going to get there, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time because it's a market that hasn't been developed fully. And in thinking about David as an economist, you need a product, and you need to define it. You need to be able to measure it. You need to have a way of exchanging it, et cetera. And a lot of the things we've talked about is more on the philosophical side. But how do we operationalize that? And so to me, that's the takeaway as part of this session.
I'm going to jump in here because we're running short on time. I want to point out that the Texas Land Trust Council and really all of you on the stage and many more in the audience are working hard at the legislature right now. I know a lot of you are checking hearing statuses and tracking things. And so there's an opportunity to get a little boost for some funding through the Farm and Ranch Lands program at Texas Parks and Wildlife, which is a great opportunity that we should all support. In our closing moments, I want to hear from each one of you, kind of parting thoughts, and I would put a challenge to end us with a note of optimism. What's giving you hope about conservation and kind of holding the tide of land fragmentation in our state? Marianne, can you kick us off?
Two things, yes. One is innovation. I love that idea. Roel is right. We need to find new ways to do things. And I must tell you that I did not want to do this, probably because I have gray hair, but my staff pushed it, and we now have the first certified green burial site in the state. And it is going to keep us able to make money, but also to restore that land so that it is going to look like coastal prairie. There won't be headstones. It won't look like a cemetery. But, you know, I don't know if you know this, but SCI, which is the huge, funeral business, makes billions of dollars, just billions. Well, I want some of that billions, and you should want some of that billions too, secondly. But what really gives me hope is when and we do have some, kid programs, but when I hear a kid tell their parents, Mom, Dad, you should be doing this because this is going to be for us, for all of us. And they get excited about what we're doing. And it's not necessarily that they're going to be in the green industry, but they care about what we're doing, and they instruct their parents to care about it. And it's pretty exciting.
That's great. All right, Mark.
So I've been doing this almost 20 years, and I think everyone else will agree, there has been a definite shift in attitudes and interest around our work. In the past 3 to 4 years, we have all seen dramatic upticks in the work that we're doing. I can never pinpoint exactly what that is. The work we used to do sometimes was seen as negative or it had a bad connotation. That has seemed to diminish, and now it is seen in a much more positive light. And so I think we're moving in the right direction. I don't know if we're moving rapidly enough, but we're definitely moving in the right direction.
That was my first thought exactly. When I started to work for the Texas Ag Land Trust in 2016, especially in the ag community, there's a very, very bad attitude about conservation easements. And that attitude has changed, and one of the benefits of this intergenerational transfer is the next generation is welcoming us, and they're wanting to have a conversation, and they're supportive of those efforts. So that's the very first thing that popped into my mind too, Mark.
Yeah, ditto on that. I mean, it's and I think it comes to Roel mentioning that the markets have to mature, and there's time, right, and those innovations, and I think we're kind of, we finally hit that sweet spot where people understand it and embracing the tool of the conservation easement. And I think the stars are aligning on new innovations of new markets and other ecosystem service markets. I think the key to understand is there's not a silver bullet, and there's not one of these tools that can do it all. It's really about stacking all the tools together and really moving us. I think the thing that we didn't talk about on the panel is also the innovations of markets and free market approaches to conservation. But I think we're also going to need innovations in policy, right? And some of those triggers as well, as we kind of think forward, the next 10 years.
So with the last minute here, one of the things that I think is drives me, and I would share with the group, is being part of a department at Texas A&M, about 300 students. I think the future of our students, there's an increasing number of students in natural resources. They want to do the right thing. They're passionate about doing that type of work and so forth. They recognize the limitations. You're not going to become wealthy doing that, but again, they have a strong interest in that and looking into these alternative or innovative approaches. And so to me, I think the future of our natural resource stewards and associated landowners brings me optimism.
Awesome. Thank you all. Well, as we said, there was so much left unsaid on this panel, from what's happening outside of the state of Texas to land use policy and opportunities there. So we didn't cover it all. I would encourage you all to find these folks. I think we're going into a break, so find these folks and ask them any follow-up questions you have. In closing, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to Pam Hart for making this session of the conference possible. Thank you to Pam and Will for making this possible, to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation for their sponsorship of this event. And please join me in thanking this incredible panel of experts on land conservation.